Did you know there are substantial grants that are possible for first-time homebuyers? There's also a new grant for people who have never purchased a house in their family. So if your parents or your grandparents have never purchased a house, there is now special funding for people exactly like yourself. I'm going to bring Molly Zimmerman from Bell Bank Mortgage on today to help me talk about these grant programs and find out if you potentially should consider talking to somebody about getting one of these programs for yourself. Some of these programs you can stack on top of each other, and so the only way to know the answer is to talk to a local Minnesota loan officer. And of course, Molly would love to chat with you. I'll have her information below. Before I go any further, I'll do a quick introduction. I'm Erica Carlson. I'm a real estate agent in the Twin Cities. I align myself with Bricks Real Estate, which is a boutique brokerage, and we have offices all over the Twin Cities. Mine, however, happens to be out of Maple Grove, and I primarily work in the Western Metro. If you think of anything or you're ready to take that next step and start shopping for a home or selling a home, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. The link below will bring you to my calendar and you can set up a time that works best for you. It could be to get things started or it could be a discovery call. If you learn anything new today, I would love for you to join my growing channels, whether you're finding this on Instagram, my professional Facebook page, or my YouTube channel. Please follow along to get more information like this. So I have been talking to people for years about the Minnesota First Time Homebuyer Grant. It's one of the largest amount of money that you can potentially qualify for when you are either have been out of the real estate owning process for a long time. There's certain caveats. It's not as long as you think. Also, if you're just new and you've never purchased a house, of course, and I want you to explore those options before you go too far down and assume you need to save up certain money. Now, some of this money needs to be repaid. Some of it's truly a grant. It just depends on your situation. And I've definitely met people who are like, no, this is the one I want, but it doesn't work that way. You have to find out if you qualify. The first step is to find your favorite loan officer and apply for a loan before anything else is going to happen. A real estate agent cannot answer that question for you. Even if we ask a lot of questions, you should be talking to a loan officer. And it's important you choose one that is in Minnesota so that you are getting the ability to chime into all the different programs in Minnesota. Unfortunately, sometimes our national lenders just don't have that ability to get into that down payment assistance. And so one of the first questions you might want to ask is, do you offer down payment assistance? You do need to go a little deeper than that. You need to ask if they offer Minnesota first-time homebuyer money. Do they offer first-generation money? Do they have the local cities? There are a lot of cities, including the suburbs in Minnesota, where there is money for that particular city. And we cannot know the answer to that unless we are talking to the right people. So I am going to talk about the real estate market data here shortly. I'm also going to bring Molly on for a brief chat so you can see if this is something that might interest you, and just to help you learn a little bit more before you call any particular loan officer.
Yeah, thanks again for having me, Erica. And I mean, the program we're specifically talking about is through Minnesota Housing. So it does cover the whole state of Minnesota, which I feel like is probably one of the biggest benefits. So it's not targeted to certain, counties, cities. You can utilize it throughout the whole state. And I think many people don't realize that you can actually use it as a first time buyer, but also as a move up buyer, as long as you hit certain income requirements. So there's a program called a Step Up, and that one is specifically for your first time home buyers. There is an income cap, like right around 124.2, but it is kind of based off of your household size. And then the Step Up program is for your potential move up buyer, but there is also an income cap. I think it's like in the 185 range. So it's still pretty high though.
Okay. You're saying what they make or net?
Correct. Yep. So
Okay.
it's total monthly, total gross household income. We have to use all sources of income for it.
Okay. And I did mention that before I brought you on camera, that there are times where someone can qualify where they just haven't owned a house in a while. And I can't remember how many years it is before we consider them a first time home buyer, which I know that's kind of a stupid way to say it, but
it is. So there's actually a first time home buyer is someone who has not owned a home in the last 3 years. So if we can prove that you haven't in the last 3 years, you actually regain that first time home buyer tag, and that opens up some more doors for you.
Yeah, so I think that's like if they hear nothing else, like you should ask about this if it's been 3 years or longer since you've owned a property. So this could be great for somebody who, took a break for a while and was renting and, maybe has bopped around the country. I don't know, but again, has to be all of Minnesota. Is there anything else that you think people should know about this program? Like, in terms of like what they should be asking when they call their loan officer?
Absolutely. And just to kind of piggyback off the first time home buyer piece of it, if you're also displaced from a property due to a divorce situation, you actually regain that first time home buyer status immediately. So just something to kind of keep in mind. A lot of people are not aware of that. But the Minnesota housing program, I think the biggest things just to be aware of is they've got assistance that you can pair with a first lien. So we have to do the first mortgage through Minnesota Housing, which they will determine what the interest rate options are. We have zero control over that. And then based off of your income and which program you're doing, be it startup or step up, you can get between $16,500 to $18,000 in assistance. In some cases, it's deferred, so you don't make any payments against it, but you do pay it off when you sell. And in some cases, it does have to be set up as a monthly payment loan, which in that case, you're paying off that loan over the course of 10 years at the same interest rate as your first. So it all depends on your income, and if you're a true first-time home buyer or not, like which assistance we can give you.
Something I've learned from selling properties versus buying them with folks is it's really important to understand this program rather than just being excited that you qualify for it. So I'm just going to tell a quick story. There was somebody recently who wanted to sell. They just felt like the house was getting too expensive for them. However, it just hasn't been that long of a time since they've owned the property, and they just did not ask enough questions about the DPA or down payment assistance program. It was not the fault of the loan officer. I certainly think that there was effort to explain it to this particular person. I just don't know that there was the understanding behind it. So when they called me to potentially sell, and then I had to explain to them that all of that hadn't really been started to be paid off yet. So really, it looks like it is two loans on the property, a first and a second. And so for those of you considering it, just like anybody buying a house, you need to see yourself in a house more than 2 years. It should be a 5-year minimum commitment, because when you go to sell, we have to consider all loans and all projects. Like if you just bought windows and you owe $30,000 to a window company, you're probably going to have to consider that as a part of like what's going to be reduced from your sales and how much you're going to make. So for that person, after living in that townhouse for 2 years, they had just gotten to the point where they broke even. And I'm not saying that right, like where they hit the amount that they actually paid for the loan. So they were above the amount, I'm not saying it right. Help me out, Molly.
Right. So are you saying that they had to pay off more?
Yes, their loan was more.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. The loan was more than the house. So then 2 years later, it's like we were just like even. So which means they were like, for lack of better terms for people who are trying to follow what I'm saying, is like they were just catching up at that point. So there's no pay down whatsoever. So if you go to sell, you have to be way past the price you paid to even break even, let alone make money. And so you have to understand all the concepts, and you have to ask questions. I know it's hard. It feels embarrassing to say I don't understand. But this person certainly did not understand that the DPA or the down payment assistance is a second loan, and it's due back, and we can't ignore it. And it's a part of the whole process. And that's why, we just have to ask questions. I sound like such a teacher, but it feels like such a blind side to be told in that moment, selling your house just doesn't make financial sense. And
right. And I think to put that like in terms of numbers, like let's just say you buy a $300,000 home and you're utilizing Minnesota first time home buyer their conventional program that requires 3% down. So 3% of 300 is $9,000. If you maximize that assistance, you take out 18,000, you're using $9,000 towards that 3% down. but then you've got an additional $9,000 that might be used towards closing costs or other, costs of getting into the home. But that means you've borrowed $309,000 on that $300,000 house. So
Thank
that's
you.
what I was trying to say. Like, it takes time to actually get to a point where you're recovering that, what you've borrowed against that property, since it was more than the purchase price.
The point here is what can be also good on the short or the front side might not be what's good on the back side. So it is important to work with a professional to figure these things out. I think ultimately what I'm trying to say is I just don't think that person understood, like, there it needed almost be a longer term investment because of exactly what you said. The amount taken was so high that they didn't comprehend the payback then would be higher. So it's a nuanced situation. I know maybe we're getting a little bit too in the weeds on this particular example, but these things really do happen where short term we got you the house, but the long term is if he doesn't want the house and he already doesn't want the house, it's just not maybe at that point was a little short-sighted to take the grant money. So we can certainly talk to people and figure those things out. Molly, there was another point that in this little example, I get derailed from.
Well, I mean, I think the one thing to keep in mind with Minnesota housing is you do have to have $1,000 minimum towards your purchase.
Right.
It has to be your own money. You cannot get a gift. You have to be able to use your own resources for that $1,000. And then also one cool thing that is available to first generation buyers is Minnesota housing actually has up to $35,000 in a 20-year deferred loan for someone who might qualify as a first generation home buyer, which means you have not owned a home, your parents have not owned a home, and or lost a home to foreclosure and have not owned a home since. So there's a couple different ways that you can, fit into that niche, but $35,000 interest-free, deferred. It takes 20 years to be fully forgiven. So it's only half forgiven after 10, fully forgiven after 20. So again, it does, we do have to have that conversation about the long-term effect of having that type of assistance and that amount out there for you.
And I'm sorry, I don't think you said this. Can you stack these programs?
You can stack them. Yes, you can stack. You could get the up to 35 for as a first gen buyer and potentially up to 18 as additional assistance. But that's again, then you've got two liens out there that do need to be paid back when you sell. You just don't want to forget that they exist, that they're there.
Yeah. Well, and exactly what I was saying. It's like, it does matter. Like, we can't dismiss that these were not just grant, they weren't just gift money from Minnesota housing. Like they are a lot of times we need to pay these back. And then we won't talk about it deeply today, but there are city particular properties, meaning like Brooklyn Park comes to mind, St. Louis Park. Some of these cities have programs in which we can also tap into grant money, but we can, that should be on a base by base, situation, case by case. God, I am out of it. I'm going to edit all of this case by case situation for those types of city programs. So, all right, we'll wrap it up there. We definitely don't want to get long-winded about grant money that, may or may not apply to somebody. But if you have questions, please reach out to Molly directly. You can always reach out to me. Again, find somebody in Minnesota, somebody local that can help you. Unfortunately, these national lenders that we hear about just don't often have the ability to tap into particular city and state DPA programs. And that's important. You should at least find out if that's something you qualify for and if it works in your situation. Thank you so much, Molly.
Yeah, thank you.
So I don't have Twin Cities real estate data at large. This week we'll just focus on Wright County, and there's definitely some good news for buyers. And if you're a seller, don't be nervous. But the fact of the matter is, again, we're in the summer market. That does change things. Maybe what your neighbor sold for in the spring isn't quite what you're going to sell for in the summer. Multiple offers are still happening. So buyers, don't get it in your head that like anything and everything's possible. I have been working with a lot of people lately that are doing what I would consider considerably low offers in hopes that their offer is going to stick. At this point, I have not seen anybody be able to come in with a sizable discount. The better strategy for you is to simply wait and see what's going to happen with that property, see if they're going to lower the price. And you really don't want to be coming in with those aggressive low offers until you're hitting like a month or 2 months or 3 months on market. And sellers, that's good advice for you. Don't be surprised if you're not doing price reductions to try to capture a buyer. Don't be horribly surprised if somebody comes in and gives you a lower offer. So looking at July 17th, which it is today, our inventory is a very high level in terms of our short time together. I had to really scroll back. I think it was to October before I saw these numbers. But this is like the highest amount of inventory we've seen in a very long time. You can see on my screen that 522 is the actual inventory you can purchase right now with no contingencies. So 579 represents all active properties in the Wright County area, all price points. Pendings haven't changed since last week, but you can see they're down like overall. And then closings have just from last week have started to dip down. So we're looking for trends over time. It'll be very interesting to see. I would imagine that number would keep coming down because we're moving away from the people who purchased a house in the spring and they're now closing. So it doesn't surprise me at all that the closings are starting to slow down as well. Average days on market, we're looking at 28, which isn't much different than the last couple of weeks. Median is 14. Again, that's about the same. So it's taking about a month, a couple weeks to sell a house. Shouldn't like take you off by surprise if you don't sell your house the first weekend. Try to be patient. Closings, showings. As you can see on my screen, in Wright County, it's the same as last week, which isn't much different from the week before that. 2.1, and what that means is then that 250 to 500K range properties are getting about 2 showings a week, which is pretty slow. Not surprising, but it is on the slower side. So you do want to be patient as a seller. And buyers, again, there's not as much competition out there because inventory is up and not as many people are out shopping. So this is a great time to be looking for a house from that perspective. 4.4 in Hennepin. So it did bump up over last week. You can see we're at 3.1, but the week before was 4.5. So it's definitely slower for Hennepin County as well. It's not a fast moving pace, which means, again, when you're out shopping, less likely to run into multiple offers, maybe more likely to get some things you want, like a longer inspection period, or maybe get some help with closing costs. That's what we mean when we're talking about it being more of a buyer's market than a seller's market. Now, you can run into these things. I feel like every time I write an offer, we are competing against somebody else for the same house. So typically a good rule of thumb is if you love it, somebody else loves it. You still want to use the basic philosophy that if you see a cute house, I mean the word cute loosely, there's a house you like, something you're excited about, get there quickly. Particular price points around that 300K range is probably one of the most competitive price points, especially in single family houses and especially in the suburbs. So you're shopping Coon Rapids, Plymouth, Blaine, places like that. You need to anticipate a lot of offers despite the information I'm telling you, because remember, we're doing a broad net here to capture a lot of data at once. But when you get into nuances, the single family market in that low 300 price points is highly competitive. You are a lot of times competing against investors with cash, other folks with cash. All the first time home buyers often end up at that price point. Not all, obviously, but most do end up at that low 300s. So if you're 350 and below, you really do need to be prepared for a fair amount of competition. The good news is if you're selling a house at that price range, it should not take you long. And a lot of times, let's talk about condition of the house. You can get away with a lot. People will put up with a lot, not because they want to, but simply because, again, that low 300 range, there's not enough there's not enough inventory. Man, I can't speak today. There's not enough inventory for folks. And so we're kind of all competing for the same couple properties. And then you add acreage, or you add probably not waterfront at that price point, but acreage in particular location, one level living. There's just these things, like people need these things. And so then the demand often can go up. So not having perfect, you're probably going to get away with it. So work with your local real estate agent before you start doing projects. A lot of times I hear people are investing into things that they absolutely don't need to do, that aren't going to make much of a difference in terms of the house selling faster or for more money. So you're certainly going to want to check in. If there's anything I can do to help you, reach out, and I'm happy to talk to you about the selling or buying investing process of the Twin Cities real estate market. Have a great week.